Today, we are going to take a look into the nonfiction book that I read in the month of February, which is This is Vegan Propaganda by Ed Winters. The complete title of the book is This is Vegan Propaganda and Other Lies the Meat Industry Tells You by Ed Winters. And there is a small blurb by Matt Haig, which says essential reading. And I agree with Matt Haig. My name is Angela. I'm your own Bookaholic brown name. You can call me Angie. In this channel, I talk about books that I have read, books that I'm reading, books that I'm planning to read. So if you love books the way I do, please subscribe to my channel. Also, please like, share, and comment on this video. So without further ado, let's get into the meat of the video. Pun intended. Ed Winters is a vegan activist and an educator. He is quite well known for his viral online videos, mostly talking about animal rights and veganism. So what I like about Winters is that in his advocacy, he's very non-provocative and very interactive. He listens to the people he engages with. He has a very calm and enduring demeanor while engaging with people on topics of veganism and animal rights. Now, he's a good listener and readily provides answers with robust scientific research backing, and these interactions most of the time galvanizes people with whom he had the exchange to some sort of action, whether it is to try out a plant-based lifestyle or to research more on the topic instead of just dismissing the topic as a fringe hippie movement. The book is divided into three parts. The first part is called It's a Question of Morality. In the first chapter of this first part, Winters explores why veganism is a social justice movement which needs to be looked or examined through the lens of moral philosophy. Here, Winters underlines the fact that veganism, as opposed to how some vegans claim, is not a position of moral high ground but rather a position of moral baseline. It's just a baseline, not a moral high ground. This is something that is expected out of all human beings. In the second chapter, Winters transports us to the past as far as to our pre-agriculture era, and from there we travel through millennia exploring, understanding, and examining the evolution of human diet, and when we started exploiting non-human animals through domestication and then progress towards large-scale industrial factory farming, and what effect this has had over the centuries or over the millennia on other sentient beings. What I found interesting is that there are many common notions that are put forth as argument against veganism as common sense, and which has been questioned by Winters very tactfully, again by providing latest scientific research. One such is this. Let me read it out to you. Despite animals making up only a portion of the prehistoric diet, people who are anti-vegan often argue that our brains developed as a consequence of hunting and eating meat. However, we don't know for certain why our brains began to grow and develop in the way that they did. For example, there are newer research and theories which says that the consumption of foods such as potatoes was actually responsible for the growth of our brains. In many ways, this appears to make more sense because our brains use around 20 to 25% of all our energy, and because the body's main source of energy is glucose, and consuming foods high in carbohydrates would have been highly beneficial for our cognitive development as opposed to protein from meat. Also, with the discovery of fire allowed us to cook food that would have previously been hard to digest, such as wild grains and tubers, which became staples in our diet and are some of the most carbohydrate dense food on the planet. There are many common arguments that are laid out against veganism in most popular discourse by anti-vegans as excuse to continue consuming meat, and he has provided counter arguments, which definitely provides us with more food for thought, especially for people who are on the fence or who are not convinced with the argument of veganism. Before I move on to what chapter 3 is about, just wanted to read out a paragraph here. We often make appeals to nature to justify our consumption of animals. But even if we believe that eating animals is a natural part of being human and overlook the point that what is natural is not always what is best, morally or otherwise, what we do to animals is about as far removed from nature as possible. It is a wholly industrialized process that involves selective breeding, artificial insemination, and mutilations, to name but a few of the terrible practices that happen every day. It treats animals as if they're simply replaceable objects, commodities who have no value beyond the price tag on the supermarket shelf. So it is a completely capitalized, industrialized process. The third chapter, which is titled There is No Such Thing as a Happy Farm Animal, which was the most difficult chapter for me to read because it describes in detail the kind of cruelty that farm animals go through. So there is a slight trigger warning here for the content that is I'm going to share with you for another 1 or 2 minutes, but I highly recommend that you sit through it because it's very important that you understand and what kind of torture and terror these innocent animals go through in the farms. For example, in most of the animal farms, there are so many breaches of laws associated with animal rights. For example, breaches include chickens being boiled alive, pigs being submerged alive in tanks of scalding hot water, animals not being stunned properly or even at all before slaughter, and trucks of animals suffocating or freezing to death. During an investigation conducted by a group called Animal Aid, they were able to film animal laws being broken, including workers punching animals, burning them with cigarettes, deliberately electrocuting them. In 2 slaughterhouses, nearly every single pig was improperly stunned. There are many other instances that he explains. For example, piglets usually have their teeth clipped out and their tails chopped off without the use of any anesthetic as soon as they are born. So these are small, tiny piglets, okay? The mutilations are carried out to reduce incidents of pigs attacking one another or cannibalizing, both of which are consistent problems in pig farms due to the confinement of the pigs and the subsequent frustration and boredom they endure. This appeal to nature as an argument against veganism is futile. Apart from the exploitation and torture of animals, there is a huge human cost involved in the whole animal farming industry. For example, Winters takes the case of tanneries in India and Bangladesh. In India and Bangladesh, due to the chemicals required to turn cattle skin into leather, tannery workers suffer from health problems such as skin diseases, acid burns, corroded fingers, peeling skin, eye problems, and even sudden death, with the chemicals also increasing their risk of cancer. Also, this industry is extremely dangerous. So the workforce endangerment is quite high. For example, workers suffer from crush injuries, eye damage, amputations, and loss of limbs, and sometimes even death. A huge percentage of slaughterhouse workers suffer from mental health problems. They suffer from anxiety and depression. Slaughterhouse workers have also shown to suffer from alcoholism, drug abuse, sleep disturbances, destructive social consequences, suicidal thought, PTSD, and something called perpetrator induced traumatic syndrome, which is similar to PTSD except it is caused by having committed violent acts oneself instead of witnessing or being a victim of a traumatic event. You can see that the amount of human cost on top of the torture that we submit these animals to in this hugely industrialized capitalist system. I would like to end this part with a short paragraph. As a society, we condemn people who kill animals. If someone stabbed a dog, we would presume that they were either mentally unwell or an evil person. However, we expect people who spend upwards of 60 hours a week repetitively stabbing chickens, pigs, cows, and lambs to hang up their bloody aprons at the end of the day and then just integrate back into normal society. The emotional burden of doing the work that almost nobody else wants to do because of its violent nature, and doing it because you feel you have no other choice and are therefore trapped, must inevitably lead to desensitization, repression, and anger for many. In part two of the book, which is titled Playing with Fire, Winters examine the effect factory farming has on our environment, on our planet, and our health. We get a look into how factory farming affects our environment in the form of deforestation, increased carbon emission, decreased biodiversity, mass extinction, zoonotic diseases, and antibiotic resistance. He also digs deep into this debacle of sustainability factor of plant-based versus meat diet. We also get to take a detailed look into how big corporates campaign to promote meat eating or meat consumption via infiltrating and lobbying governments and judiciary across the world. And in the last chapter of this part, we look into the health and nutrition aspects related to veganism, wherein questions like where do vegans get their protein from, their vitamin B12 from, their omega 3 and vitamin D and calcium, iron, etc. from, and why it is okay to take supplements and it is normal for even a meat eating person to take B12 or vitamin supplements. I have a personal story to share with you, but before that, I also want to mention that this chapter goes on to explain how much meat eating has contributed to lifestyle diseases, the explosion of lifestyle diseases these days. Coming to my personal experience, I grew up in Kerala, which is in the southernmost part of India, and in Kerala, meat, especially beef, is a huge part of our diet, and fish also. It's a coastal state, coastal region, so we eat fish like every day. It is staple for us. There is no meal without fish for us, except for breakfast. So I grew up eating fish and beef and chicken every other day, and that's how I grew up. But I cannot remember one day in my life where I have not suffered from B12 or vitamin B deficiency, and I used to have all kind of white patches on my skin, very ugly patches. I used to think that my skin and my face is the most ugliest in the entire world. So I had this huge inferiority complex. So my mom used to take me to doctor every time, and doctor every time would say it's all about taking supplements, take your B complex tablets and everything will be okay. So me, a huge meat eater back then, still had vitamin B12 or vitamin B deficiency. So I used to take B complex tablets. So this is also what Winters has explained in this book, that it is common for people, whether vegan or non-vegan, to take supplements in one form or the other. But how is that a problem only when vegans take supplements? Our diet always will have some or the other form of deficiency. And for example, people living in the mountain will not have access to, fishes, right? And how do they get their omega 3? Some way or the other, you have to supplement your diet artificially. I don't know how well I explain this, but this book does a very great job in explaining it to you. So that's why I will recommend you to read this book. Part 3 is called Breaking Down Barriers. Now, the first chapter is about, this how to overcome psychological barriers. What I see around me, and what is also, very well explained by Winters, is that most people that I know in personal life who are meat eaters are kind, empathetic, sensitive and intelligent human beings. They are kind people. I cannot call them, cruel, evil people. No, they are not. They are not people who outright go and harm a person or an animal for that matter. So, how come such amazing human beings get desensitized towards the suffering of innocent sentient beings? How does that happen? There is some kind of disconnect going on between these people who actually, will cry out when a dog is lying on the road, being hit by being run over by a vehicle. And these are people who will rush over to help the animal and do their best to save that animal. And at the same time, then they will go back home and they will eat a meat burger. So where does this disconnect happens? And the answer to that is cognitive dissonance. Now, Winters uses a two-sentence explanation to explain this. Our desire for cheap clothes contradicts our shared value of being against human exploitation, and in the case of what we do to animals, our desire to eat animal products contradicts our being against animal cruelty. So there is a dissonance, cognitive dissonance going on. There is a nice brief video that was made by Alex O'Connor, aka Cosmic Skeptic, about cognitive dissonance. I will link that video in the description. Do check it out. It's a very brief video but fantastic and explains this concept very well. But this is what happens with us. And there's another thing that is that we generally in our society normalize meat consumption. From childhood, we see in our plates meat, but we do not see the source. We are never exposed to the source until we grow up, and until meat eating becomes a normal part of our daily, day-to-day diet. So by then it's too late for us to be bothered about it. So we become desensitized towards that. Another is that for us, perception matters a lot. So when we think about meat as a part of our diet, something that needs to be consumed, we do not think of the individual animal, but we think of it as a collective, as a herd. So we think of them as a commodity, as a product which has no intrinsic emotional value, but which is not the case. These are sentient beings which have emotions, feelings, and can feel pain, most importantly. And most of the times, this is easily achieved by devaluating them as lesser intelligent or unintelligent creatures. Another factor that desensitizes extremely amazing human beings towards animal cruelty is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when our brain view information that agrees with our preconception as being more important than information that contradicts them. The information we are first taught is fundamental to how we perceive the world as we develop and is very difficult to dislodge, even when there is good evidence that it is wrong. This part was particularly very interesting for me to read because this is where the concept of where meat eating is equated with masculinity, right? If you're a man, eat meat, right? We are men, we hunt. There is this new slur that is used by anti-vegans against male vegans called soy boy and all that. So it was an interesting chapter for to read. So it was an interesting chapter for me to read personally. The last chapter is aimed specifically towards people who are already vegan and who want to participate in the advocacy of veganism, basically how to create effective conversations about veganism. So to conclude, I think that this book will become a sinew or a foundational work in veganism. Winters has done an excellent job in providing us the basic foundational information that we need to understand veganism. This book is definitely aimed at all category of people, for people who are against veganism, for people who are on the fence regarding this concept, and also for people who are already vegans. But for people who are already vegans like me, most of the concept and topics that are discussed in this book might not be path breaking or completely new, but still this is definitely worth a read. If you haven't read this, please go ahead and read it with an open mind. There is no pressure for you to become vegan, but at least you will have understood why people like me argue that veganism is the future, or at least why it should be the future, for the well-being of human beings, for the well-being of other sentient beings whom we are exploiting currently, and also for the survival of our planet. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in another video very soon. This is Angie signing off. Bye bye.